coming tonight for another History on Tap. This time we're covering women in the wild, and there were probably plenty of them that were wild or in the wild, but I know a lot of the ones we're going to talk about tonight, there are many of you here that either knew them personally or have heard of them. I know I have, the ones I'm giving and Greta's presenting. We also have Ashley from the Couchiching County Historical Society here with us too. So I'm glad to see that people are coming more and more. It seems like every time we've had this, it's only the second time, but it's good to see most of the chairs filled. I think this is very interesting. I know there's a lot of stories around that can be told and should be told. And we always encourage you to give comments after our presentations if you have stories, and I'm sure you do. I see some people that have a degree in BS, and I could tell plenty of stories. So anyway, I'll turn it over to Ashley.
Okay, so the first woman that I'm going to share with you this evening, her name is Jane Frambos, and she is actually a half native, half white woman. She was a quarter Ojibwe and a quarter Sioux. Jane was born in Sauk Rapids somewhere between 1820 and 1822. We don't really know exactly when she was born, but she was the daughter of William Dixon, who was a well-known fur trader. And then she was married in 1845. She got married into the Frambos family. So her husband's first wife passed away, and she got hooked up with this gentleman. They're not really sure exactly how much of the ceremony that she really understood because English was not her first language. Her husband had to prompt her to reply to the pastor continuously throughout the ceremony. After she was married to Joseph, she took over all of the care for the Frambos children. She also gave birth to 5 of her own, but only 3 of them survived. Joseph died in 1856, and then Jane married another gentleman named Louise Sharon, and that happened in 1858, and they had 2 children together. So how does this relate to Couchiching County? So Jane is actually the very first person to ever file a homestead in Couchiching where she actually gets a claim. So not only is she a woman, but she's also the first person that actually gets any real property. So she files a claim here in September of 1882, and her homestead was in Wildwood Township. So how it worked is she received this land allotment through what was considered an Indian allotment, which basically happened sometime during a treaty in 1851. And this allowed her and Joseph's children of native descent to receive scrip for their share of the land. And so what you could do with this scrip is basically you treat it like money. You could buy land with it, or in Jane's case, you could take the scrip and you could, get the land, and what she did is she got this land and then get the scrip back. So she proved up her homestead and then she left the area. So she got the land with the scrip, she proved it up, then she gave the scrip back, and she got money for it. So she wasn't here for very long. We know that she died sometime in 1885, and she was 64 years old. She's not buried here. She's in Birch Coulee Township, which is, they have a cemetery there called St. Patrick's Cemetery. So she's a super interesting lady. She was very difficult to research because there's not a lot of stuff written about her. I sort of had to piece it all together. But she does have the distinction of receiving not only the first patent for homesteading here, but she's a woman that got to do it.
Greta?
The people I'm going to talk tonight about are all former Mispa people, and I chose that because it's near and dear to my heart where I was raised. Louise Rebecca Sietz. Louise Rebecca Sietz was born in 1890 to Louise and Frederick Sietz, New Auburn, Minnesota. Louise had responsibilities in the Syatt's home from the time she was little, as her parents owned businesses in both New Auburn as well as in Browntown, Minnesota, where they operated a hotel. In October of 1902, at 12 years old, Louise, better known as Lulu, arrived in the far north with her parents and oldest brother. They had come by train and departed at Black Duck, Minnesota, the end of the rail line at that time. Her older siblings, 3 brothers and 1 sister, joined them within a month. The family walked in the cold and mud along what was constructed of the railroad grade. They camped one night out, as it was a 40-mile trip in those days. Her father had come north beforehand and staked a claim on 160 acres just east of what later became Mizpah. At the time of the Syatts' arrival, the town of Mizpah consisted of 2 log cabins. Lulu walked to the first Mizpah school, which was held in a log cabin used for multi-purposes. It was a school, printing office, church, etc. She walked from her parents' homestead to the school across fields and mud. She brought a dry set of clothes each day so that she could change when she arrived at school. Her walk was 1.25 miles each way. The school attendance increased in Mizpah, and after the town was platted and a new printing building was built, the upper story built to serve as both a school, the community hall for social gatherings. Lulu also attended this school and had an even farther walk. In 1904, Mizpah had its first school building constructed to serve solely as a school. Lulu is pictured among the small student body in the fall of 1904, the first session in the new school building. May 1917, at the age of 27, Lulu married Harley B. Reiners, well known in the Gimel and Mizpah communities. Lulu served as the assistant postmaster in both 1917 and 1918. Lulu was appointed acting postmaster of Mizpah in 1933, receiving her permanent appointment in 1934. She held this position until 1961 when she retired. In July of 1927, Lulu experienced the terrible loss of her sister Etta and Etta's 2 daughters, who all drowned along with 2 friends from Gimel. Lulu and Harley soon moved into Etta's home and undertook the responsibility to raise Etta's 8-year-old son, Jean Francis. They raised daughter, Jean Francis. They raised Jean until she was 16 years old and joined her father, who had moved to California. Lulu and Harley raised their 4 children in Mizpah, 2 sons and 2 daughters, Frederick, Russell, Elizabeth, and Dorothea. All of their children went on to receive a college education, speaks highly of their parents and the encouragement which they gave their children. During these years of working a full-time job and raising a family, Lulu gave considerable time and interest to the community of Mizpah as one actively involved as a charter member of the Mizpah Presbyterian Church. She served as a trustee and for years was a Sunday school superintendent and was one of the first women to serve as the elder of the presbytery. She was also active in the American Legion Auxiliary as well as the Mizpah Community Club, meeting the civic interests, needs, as well as individual needs, such as for those experiencing difficulty. Lulu's father died in 1930. She and the family, along with Jean, moved from the Francis home into the Mizpah drugstore building in order to help Lulu's aging mother, Louise Syatts, age 77 at the time. Lulu began serving as Mizpah's postmaster in the drugstore building beginning in 1933, while also providing some assistance to her mother in running the Mizpah drugstore. That was the role she continued in until her mother reached the age of 92 and decided it was time to sell the drugstore. After that time, it appears that Lulu continued to care for her mother for another 3 years. Probably Lulu's greatest gift was caring for those around her. While she was considered a worrywart by her grandchildren, she truly was concerned about each one of them as well as others. An impoverished family might find themselves the beneficiary, the gift of a good dresser, thanks to Lulu's good heart. Lulu was considered by many in the community to be one in the know, and that speaks of the key role she played in the role of postmistress. Her husband Harley also was a county commissioner, as well as holding many roles in county offices, which meant knowledge and interaction with others was a daily requirement of her life. Lulu died in 1972 at almost 82 years of age. And we are fortunate enough to have a couple of her relatives here. And I know Tana might have something she might want to share. Doug Fleming in the back as well shared some other information with me, and we'd love to hear what you guys have to say.
Well, I don't know a lot of Lula's history. We always kind of depended on my sister Sue to take care of all the family history, and she knows it all. But what I remember most about Aunt Lula is we lived across the street from her when I was growing up, and I realize now she was concerned about our well-being and everything, but she did keep a close eye on us, and she would report to my dad if we had the lights on too late. And sometimes she'd run across the street to check things out, and she did know what was going on in town.
We call her nosy.
Sometimes my sister and I would put a blanket across our window upstairs so she couldn't tell the lights was on.
The school the new school is actually now the Lutheran Church in Mizpah. That is the same building.
That was moved in from Pine Top, did you know that?
Well,
That was a town hall out in Pine Top, there across by the big pine tree out there. The Lutheran church was.
That must have been an interesting move
Yeah,
in those days.
yeah, it must have been.
Thank you.
All right. My first lady in the wild that I'm going to report on tonight is someone I'm sure most of you knew or heard of, Edith Alvina Engelking. Edith Alvina Engelking was born on January 6, 1892 in Steele County, Minnesota, to Ernst Heinrich Wilhelm and Catherine Missel Freud Engelking. Little is known about Edith's early years, as her mother died when she was 2 years old. She came to Northome, which was called Fina at that time, from Renville, Minnesota, with her aunt Caroline Engelking. They homesteaded 4 miles east of Northome, which was known as Englewood Township. She had 3 brothers, Rudolph, Edward, and August, as well as 4 sisters, Clara, Marie, Sophia, and Alma. She attended Northome School and graduated from the 8th grade in 1910. In 1919, she married Hans J. Gregerson, who had come from Little Falls, Minnesota. They built their first home in 1921 on County Road 36 South, where it is still lived in today by members of that family. 2 daughters were born to them, Lucille Shuey and Marjorie White. Edith worked as a seamstress, and she made dresses for her granddaughters and their dolls. She would make the patterns of newspapers. She loved to bake, and her bread and cookies were delicious. Neighbors liked to come by and play cards and visit. She always had goodies for them to eat. Edith was also a talented gardener, and she canned many jars of vegetables and fruit. They farmed cattle as well, so food was always ample in supply. She is an active member of the Methodist Church in Northome, the American Legion Auxiliary, and the Park Avenue Club. Some might not know that going east out of town used to be known as Park Avenue, and the ladies would have the neighborhood would have what was called the Park Avenue Club. She died at home on September 26, 1985 from a stroke, and is buried in the Forest Hill Cemetery here in Northome.
Okay, so the next person that I have for you is a woman by the name of Bessie Burke Peterson. She was a pioneer midwife in Ericsburg. Bessie was born October 4th, 1858, and she was born in Norway. She left Norway when she was 19 years old, and she had absolutely no idea what she wanted to do with her life. She just knew that she wanted to come to America, and she wanted to find her corner of the world. She wanted to find her place where she felt like she belonged, and that was going to be really special to her. She ended up in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and when she was there, she met an adventurous young man who was captain. His name was Andrew Peterson. And just to give you an idea of how adventurous Andrew was, his very best friend in the entire world was Roald Amundsen. He was the first man to reach the South Pole in 1911. Sorry, Amundsen. So she falls in love with this Andrew Peterson, and they get married. And she has 11 children, but only 9 of them survive. And, you know, they're living in Minneapolis, they have this great life, and then in 1905, all of a sudden, Andrew decides that he wants to live somewhere else. He wants to live somewhere that's much more like his homeland of Norway. So homesteading opens up in northern Minnesota, and for some reason he decides that Eriksburg is a lot like Norway. And so he gets on a train and he heads to Eriksburg, and he builds a 2-room log cabin for his family. Eventually it gets replaced by something slightly larger, but that's what they start out in. Bessie comes to the area in 1907, and she hops on this rail car with 5 of her 9 children, all of their household belongings, and their family dog Shep. And she's very skeptical of this adventure, and she should be, because she's leaving Minneapolis to come live in Eriksburg. And so she gets to Eriksburg, and obviously it's culture shock because there really isn't anything there. International Falls isn't super developed at the time, and she's living in Eriksburg. But she quickly settles into her new neighborhood. She starts making a lot of friends. And I'm not really sure if Bessie had a lot of formal nurse training, but she sort of becomes the neighborhood/community nurse. She is bandaging up wounds, she's fixing broken arms, she's helping farmers deliver cattle, and she also starts delivering babies. Lots and lots and lots of babies. She is responsible for being present at the birth of nearly every single child in the Eriksburg area from 1907 until 1926. So that's a lot of babies that she's delivering. And then she passes away. She passes away at the age of 67, which it appears that she died from complications of diabetes. And then when she dies, all of her family is gone. Andrew picks up and leaves. He decides that he's going to go off to the coast because he wants to go sail boats again. And he continues to sail boats until he dies at the age of 82. But I think that Bessie's story is really interesting because Bessie becomes the reason why they even stay in Coochin County and why they stay in Eriksburg in the first place. She didn't want to come here. She didn't know anybody. She was not thrilled to leave a metropolitan area with her children. But Eriksburg became her home, and it became her place in the world. She found her purpose. And she is buried in the Eriksburg Cemetery. She's buried there with a 5-year-old granddaughter by the name of Betty May. And the only thing that marks their grave is a brick, and all it says on it is love. And there's a picture of it over there. So if you ever are up that way and you want to go visit her, you can. I have gone to visit her. So it's kind of an interesting little spot that she's in. And it was written that she felt that she found her place in Coochin, which she always thought was kind of surprising because it was the very last place, I think, in the world that she probably thought that she was going to end up.
What about her children? Did they stay in the Eriksburg area?
Everyone left. Everyone's gone. I don't know where any of her family is.
Christine Larson I chose Christine because my grandmother, Norma Larson, worked at the nursing home for many, many years. And I can remember her talking about Christine Larson almost every day. She must have been an amazing woman, because I thought my grandma was an amazing woman, but Christine must have really, I don't know, spoke to her, whatever, because as a little kid I can still remember Christine talking about Christine Larson. Christine Larson was born November 23rd, 1886 at Little Falls, Minnesota, and had 4 brothers and 1 sister. Her parents were Peter and Georgine Simonson Gregerson. Both were born in Denmark and grew up there. The family came to America in 1880 and settled on a homestead in Swan River Township. The children all attended grade school at District No. 9 in Swan River, Minnesota. In 1908, Christine came to Mizpah, where she worked for the Ross Hansen family, helping with housework and cooking for Hansen's mill crew. A brother, Hans Gregerson, came to Mizpah area about the same time. In 1909, Christine married Rasmus Larson at the Presbyterian Church in Mizpah. They lived at Rasmus's farm a mile south of Mizpah and had 3 children, Mildred, Alice, and Roger. Christine was skilled at and enjoyed many kinds of handiwork such as knitting, crocheting, and embroidery. Rasmus farmed and worked in the woods. They lived on the farm until 1945 and then moved into Mizpah, where Rasmus worked on a railroad crew. He also worked at the M&O Paper Company with a mill located in Mizpah. Rasmus and Christine attended the Bethesda Lutheran Church in Mizpah, and Christine was a member of the Ladies' Aid. She was active in the town's events and wrote Mizpah news for the Northome Record for many years. They lived in Mizpah until 1964, when they moved to the Northome nursing home. By this time, Rasmus had been blind for quite a few years, so Christine had to take care of him. After Rasmus' death in 1968, Christine continued to live there, where she often took part in bingo, reading groups, and Bible study. She attended the resident council and often walked uptown. Christine died August 29, 1985, at the age of 98 years old.
My next lady is one that a lot of us I know knew. She was quite a lady. I'm going to read about Marie Engelking Garrison. Marie Engelking was born September 1886 in Dodge County, Minnesota. She came to what became the Northome area in 1901 when she was 13 years old. She came with Fred Schumacher and his wife Eloise, Lizzie. Eloise was an Engelking and a cousin to Marie. Marie's mother, Anna Engelking, along with their small daughter Eunice, also made the trip from Renville, Minnesota. Marie's cousin, Herman Engelking, that had come north and staked a homestead claim when there was no train north of Bemidji in about 1900. The train took them as far as 10 Strike, Minnesota, and from there they traveled to Black Duck, Minnesota on a gravel train. Must have been a rocky ride. There was much talk of the railroad and when it was going farther on. They had a very rough trip. They stopped in Dexterville, which later became Funkley. They slept on homemade bunk beds with moose hides for mattress and covering. On the trip up, they met a cousin of Marie, Herman Engelking, coming out with Ole Olsen, who became Northome's first postmaster. They and the folks up north had not yet heard that their president, McKinley, had been shot. The news was 3 weeks old, but had not yet reached those in the North Bush. At the time their small party arrived in Northome, in the Northome area, there were only 2 business buildings, the Bancroft Place and the Grindle Hotel and Barroom. The Engelking sawmill was 1 mile east. Marie was among the first students in school in the Northome area. The first school was started in the fall of 1902 with an enrollment of 12 pupils. This was in Township 151, Range 28, later part of it to be incorporated as the village of Northome. Marie Engelking wrote a book, Whispering Pines, in 1966. This book tells of the early years of what is now southwest Couchiching County. It was still a wild and raw land when she came, and she lived in seeing it develop for good and bad, and the numerous changes that took place every year. Annie Shellen was one of the first teachers in the Northome area. She later became the county superintendent of schools for Couchiching County for about 8 years before she accepted a position with the State Department of Education. When Marie wrote Whispering Pines in 1966, the following introduction by Annie Shellen Williams tells us a lot about Marie Engelking and the value of her recall in the account of history of settling this part of Minnesota. And I quote, "I am glad to introduce and honor a woman I've known for over 50 years. Marie Engelking was related to one of the first large family groups to settle in the wilderness of trees, then part of Itasca County. I soon became part of Couchiching County as county superintendent. I met her in 1907 in the Porter School east of Northome. She was then building her own fires, had few books or other equipment, and was walking miles from her boarding place. With little equipment, she was teaching the children to master their lessons, be thorough and accurate, and find the great thoughts that led to higher thinking. She married a settler, Lindsay M. Garrison. They patiently overcame the many obstacles of their days, but never lost sight of values and ideals. Her preserving the past history, her patience and work in gathering and combining the facts and stories of those days deserves much credit and has led her to present a very good picture of the difficulties and pleasures that existed in those days. All honor to her success in acquainting the younger generation with the life of their grandparents, A.S. Williams. Marie Engelking taught at the Porter School from 1907 to 1908. The school was located about 23 miles east of Northome on Park Avenue, or Highway Number 1, a short distance from the old A.J. Porter Place, and on what in 1956 was the Harrison Place. This was the first year Couchiching County was organized. There were 4 Porter children, Zora, Harry, Alan, and Victor. 2 Lester Mitchell children, Violet and Marion. 2 Gus Carlson children, Axel and Ethel, Cora Wade, and for part of the year, Minnie Sykes, daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Edgar Sykes and Alma Engelking. By the way, this is a quote from Marie. I enjoyed teaching this little school. My boarding place was 1.5 miles from the school, 1 mile east and 1/2 mile north, with Mr. and Mrs. Adrian Wade and little Cora. There were no settlers between the school and the Wade homestead. The little schoolhouse stood in a small clearing amid the unbroken forest. We never missed a day of school. The winter was unusually mild and not much snow. The Christmas program was well attended. The children and I had decorated the room with evergreen boughs. We cut down a good-sized spruce tree which filled half of the space in front of the room. We decorated it with stars made from silver paper, found in tea packages, popcorn, apples, and gifts, also candles. People came who lived 10 miles and more away. They came with sleds and horses. Marie, as I said, married Lindsay Garrison in June of 1908. They had 3 children, Sylvia, Maxwell, and Edith, Mrs. Tom Uran. Marie died December 4th, 1967, and is buried at the Northome Forest Hills Cemetery here in Northome. There's another quote here, Marie Engelking. In this new country there was a spirit of oneness and friendliness. Everyone was your neighbor, and you loved your neighbor as yourself in deed and truth. Class distinction, of course, was unknown. There were no lines of political or religious demarcation. You were taken at face value. The pioneer was the true Democrat. The earliest settlers of this area of Northome, Island Lake, Bridgie, and Mizpah were some of the happiest people as a whole that I have known anywhere. We have much to be thankful for in this historical account and first-hand view Marie has left for us and generations to come.
Last but not least, I'm going to talk about Lena Dahl, who I grew up with. I remember going to Grandma Lena's house all the time. Mom and Dad would go to Martin and Florence's and we'd zip over and hang out with Grandma Lena because she had really cool hostess skills. No matter whenever we went to her house, which by the way, Lena was a small person, her house was very small as well. And as a kid, I can remember walking in, the kitchen was about this big, and then you went into like a little living room, dining room, which was about this big, and then off to the side was one bedroom. I had more fun at Grandma Lena's house than anywhere. She was a very talented lady with her hands. I can remember sitting on the floor watching her spin the wool. And anytime she'd sit and visit with anybody, she always had knitting needles. Always, 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 always knitting. She was never still. I admired Lena very much, and I think I learned a ton about her, so I feel fortunate to get to share this about her. Lena was born in Norway in 1890. She came to the United States as a young woman, not knowing a word of English. However, she was a young lady with a lot of talents, which included spinning, knitting, and cooking. Possibly her greatest gift came with her, and that was the gift of not complaining. She was a good jokester as well. Lena married Olaf Dahl in Glendive, Montana in 1916. They lived in a household on the homestead of Olaf's father in Montana. Olaf was also a native and full Norwegian. The couple had 2 boys and a girl, Martin, Spud, and Olga, and I was fortunate enough to spend time with all 3 of them. In 1912, the couple moved to Forest Grove, Minnesota, a township adjacent to Mizpah in Coochin County. Olaf Dahl both logged and farmed here, and Lena joined him in the needs of the farm. Recollections by Lena given in 1979. The time came to clear a spot on our place so we could build a log house. Not fit for a king, but good enough for us. We kept clearing and cutting down trees so we could get a place for a potato patch and garden, and also enough field to open up for some hay and crops. This was all done with a crosscut saw. The farm is now owned by our son Martin, which currently grandson Shane Swain lives at. In 1922, we had a bad forest fire. This fire was hard for all of us. We fought fire night and day. Ole Bull, being the only man in camp, made a backfire which saved our place. Olaf was out working in the woods making a living. We say hard times as well as much hard work. I did all the chores when my husband was away. The snow was deep, which made for a lot of snow shoveling. Sometimes I'd go out to find the haystacks drifted over and the barn door drifted in. So I began shoveling out the haystack so I could cut hay for the cows. Then there was firewood to split and get into the house. There were hard times, and while Lena seemed to have a strong recall of those times, they seemed to be memories for her. She was never known to complain, but she brought laughter to many people. Lena recalled that in 1932, she took a dozen eggs to Peter Saracen's store in Mizpah and got 5 cents a dozen. The cost of a bar of P&G laundry soap was also 5 cents. She got home, rubbed clothes on a board for 5 of us. At that time, the cost of a yard of gingham and calico material was also 5 cents a yard. So the cost of making a dress was about 25 cents. Sheep's wool was selling for 10 cents a pound, and we got nothing for the calves. Olaf Dahl died in 1943. For nearly 2 years, Lena worked in Western canneries, and then in 1945 began cooking at the Big Falls School. Later, Lena worked another 9 years as head cook at the Mizpah School. Lena had the reputation as being a good cook, but is probably well remembered as the lady that really liked children. She officially retired at the age of 69, but spent many years traveling to various schools in both Coochin County and also Beltrami County. She demonstrated both spinning and knitting to school children while she sang Norwegian songs for the children. I got to witness that a whole bunch of times. It was pretty cool. Lena made many socks and mittens for her family and others for which she is remembered. My dad was fortunate enough to have a pair of Lena Dahl's hand-knit socks, and I can remember him getting ready for work, putting those, they were like his favorite socks because Grandma Lena was pretty cool. And matter of fact, when I told him I was going to do this, he went to try to find the socks. They were wore out a long time ago. Anyway, It was Lena's joy to move into the new Northome apartments in 1977 and to have indoor plumbing. She was active in the Lutheran Church as well as the senior citizen activities in the area, including social activities with those in the apartment building. Her talents also include rug weaving and quilt making. Lena died in 1987 and is buried in the Forest Grove Cemetery. Lena will long be remembered for the positive note she brought to many lives in our community area, both children and adults. She was ready to dance at the drop of a hat and made many of us also feel like dancing.
Thanks, Greta. Ashley?
Okay, so the last woman that I have for you is Hanna Pendergast. She was a homesteader in the Lohman area. She actually lived like way out in the bush in a swamp. And she was not a typical homesteader. She was very much a city gal. And she wrote basically that her father had spent hours convincing her to homestead because there was absolutely no way that she would ever live on the best government land that there was available. But then, of course, in March of 1908, Hanna and her best friend Hattie came up to International Falls on the Northern Pacific Railroad to go accept their claims of 160 acres apiece. So with the way that her claim worked was that you could either stay on the land for 5 years with the privilege of going away to work, and then you'd keep it, or you could live there for 9 months and make notable improvements on your homestead claim, and then the government would pay you $1.25 an acre. Well, that's the option that Hanna chose because there was no way she was going to survive out in this swamp. So she gets here with her friend. They spend an afternoon in International Falls with a relative, and then the very next day they bundle up and they head out for Lohman. They're in overcoats, they have tons of wool clothes, they have heated soapstones in their socks to keep them warm. And they're piled high with all of these blankets and robes, and they hire someone, they hire this sleigh to take them out. It costs them $5 for the day to get them out there. She had hired to have these men build her a cabin on her homestead, and when she gets there, she finds out that they built her a cabin, but they did not build her any furniture, they did not give her any cupboards, and they only made like a partial door. So here's this lady who doesn't know anything about living by herself, let alone living in the wild, and she had to sit out there in the middle of March and make her own furniture. She used apple crates to create her cupboards, and right from the get-go, she decides that she hates this experience. She keeps a very well-written and thought-out journal during the whole time that she's there. It also contains a lot of letters that she's written back and forth that she gets from her father. And Hanna just has a really bad time while she's living there. Anything that could go wrong goes wrong. She has weird like men that are like in the forest, I suppose people that are working, that are kind of creeping around her homestead claim. She has a little weasel that comes and lives with her in her house, and she's not sure how to get rid of it, so she just starts shooting holes in her floor. And then she decides that that's a bad idea, so she's just gonna let it live in her house. And her groceries go missing multiple times. She had a grocery delivery service, and her groceries ended up at her neighbor's. I am not really sure why, but she ended up having to walk. Her closest neighbor was about 3.5 miles, so she had to walk 3.5 miles one way to go get her groceries. So just nothing went right for Hanna during her time in Kuchaching, and she emphatically stated that as soon as she got out of her homestead in January, she wrote to her father that, and I quote, "As far as I'm concerned, I never want to see this old country ever again." And she never did come back. She did have a cousin, though, that loved homesteading. She homesteaded more towards the Bemidji area, so she would have been down more in this region. And her cousin kept journals as well. And she loved it. She built herself a little barn. She got herself a team of horses, and she lived out there by herself for, I'm assuming, until she passed away. Her journals don't go that far. But it was very interesting to see the difference in the contrast of those two women. But if you ever want to know more about Hanna, we do have her journals at the Historical Society. We're happy to make copies of those for people if that's something that someone wants to read. But she's very blunt, she's very honest, and she's very fascinating and funny to read.
Greta actually stole my line for this last person. Last, but certainly not least. The lady I'd like to talk about, this last lady in the wild, is my great-grandmother, Julia Olsen. I never knew her. I never had the pleasure of it. She passed away when I was born. Ron Linder knew her. He was lucky enough to have met her. She was his grandmother. She's my great-grandmother. The only way I know her, one of the ways I know her, is through my genealogy and other snippets that I've been told by different relatives throughout the years, and by a couple of her youngest children that I had the chance to sit and listen to some of their stories, Molly Linder and Bill Olsen. They were the two youngest of Julia's children. She was born on July 15th, 1866 in Norway. And when she was 16 years old, she came to America with her parents, Paul Andreas Fredriksson and Antoinette Andersdotter, along with her sister Anna in 1882. They came to the Colfax, Christine area of North Dakota, which is about 40 miles south of Fargo. It was there on July 30th, 1887 that Julia would marry another Norwegian immigrant, Ole Olsen Lund, and there they would live at Colfax and have 5 children there. In 1899, in the fall of 1899, they would move to just south of Bertha, Minnesota in Todd County, and that's where the Lund was dropped and we just became Olsens. They would have 5 more children. And then in 1910, they moved up here to Couchiching County. Julia and her husband Ole would work at Alaska, which was near Gimmel, a big mill, and she would cook. They ran kind of a restaurant at Alaska for a while, and Ole would work in the mill and in the store during different times of the year. In 1914, Ole and Julia would buy a small farm just 6 miles east of Northome. It's now the home of Shelley and Larry Shull. That's the original place that they bought for themselves. It was there in 1922 that Ole would pass away at the home and Julia would be there and raise her family. I've been told she was a very hard worker, never had a sit-down moment. She was always doing something, and she had this deal. She would go out in the woods and collect all kinds of branches and limbs to use in her cook stove, but she would make bundles and tie them with string, and then she would lay a rope in a U-shape, lay all these bundles on the U-shape, and bring the loose ends up in and under and over the top part of the loop, and then hoist them onto her back and carry them back home for firewood. I've seen pictures in Norway of the farmer women doing this, and some of the pictures there, they were not small loads of firewood. They're tough women. And I also was told that when they were out cutting wood, if the boys or whatever wouldn't bring limbs home from them trees they were cutting, they caught heck from Julia. She would probably go out and get them herself, I guess, but they probably didn't get chewed out too bad, because I've also been told the worst words they ever heard come out of Julia's mouth was, "Oh, humbug." She never wasted a thing. Canning was also a big operation, and her daughter Molly Linder, when she was with them, would help quite a bit with the canning and the big old copper boilers. When potatoes were dug, most of us, them little bitty marble potatoes, we'd just leave out in the garden, not Julia. She would go out and gather up all those little marbles and peel those marbles to make her lefse. So nothing was wasted. The best compliment I ever had concerning Julia was from a cousin of mine who said that our lefse that Karen and I make tasted just like Grandma Julia's. So that was a great compliment for me. In her later years, Julia would stay with different children of hers that were scattered from Illinois, Washington State, and here around Mizpah, Northome area with her son Bill and her daughter Molly Linder, Amelia. She would die at the home of her daughter Myrtle in Yakima, Washington on January 24th, 1953. I guess the closest I came to getting a feel for Julia was when we were in Norway and I actually got to go in the house where she was born and walk. So that was on the farm called Onexta, and that's in Toten, Norway. I'm sure not many know where Toten, Norway is, except Karen and I, maybe. So anyway, but she is buried alongside her husband Ole in the Forest Hill Cemetery, and there's a beautiful lilac bush that grows over their stone. So that's just a little bit about my great-grandmother, Julia Olsen. I'm sure Ronnie has stories of Grandma Julia.
Well, we had her back and forth for several years, but she didn't have a mind when she was with us. As a kid growing up with the rest of my brothers and sisters, we had to take turns watching her because every place she got, if she was at our place, she would go on a home. And if she got out to Uncle Bill's out there on number 1, she was going home. So all the kids in the lower class of our families had to take care of Grandma.
Yeah, I remember Uncle Bill saying that when she stayed at their house, Uncle Bill lived, like I said, where Schulls are living now, and my grandpa John Olsen, lived down the road from Matta's place, where Matta's is now. They finally had to nail the window shut because she would throw open a window and run away. She was going to Johnny's place. But unfortunately, that was the sad part about it. She did, I suppose, have Alzheimer's, I suppose, something like that. But, so anyway, that's my
We call
grandma.
it old age.
Yeah. That's our Grandma Julia.
And I might add that when I was in Mizpah school, Lena Dahl was our cook for about 4 years there, if I remember correctly.
You're fortunate you got to experience that.
Yeah.
I got to do it too.
Yeah, she was a neat lady.